Boom! We're
Hi. I'm glad you can make it. I know I was like, I have no idea what to do.
I know. Well, I was trying. It took me a while
I'm pretty
to do.
I'm pretty new to the Instagram live videos, so I feel like a little helpless. I'm like, just join. I don't really know what to do. Sorry.
Uh,
So
See, but
thank you so much.
at least you should like either move your camera up or scoot back a tad, because everybody can only see like this much of you.
Is this better?
That's way better.
Okay,
Let
I'll stay back
everybody
here.
see all of you,
Thank
Lee.
you.
You're beautiful. Let it show.
Thank you. Well, thank you so much for joining. I kind of want to introduce you a little bit to our viewers, but then I want you to introduce yourself because you're way better at it than I am. So, so this is Samuel Knickerbocker, and if I understand correctly, you're a wealth and life transformation coach. Is that how you describe it?
I would say wealth and legacy. Wealth and legacy is probably more.
Right. And
Yeah,
your motto
hearts.
is, huh?
Oh, all the people pushing hearts.
Oh.
Thank
you. And your motto is fuel your legacy, right? And that's what you're all about, is helping people to fuel their legacy.
Mm-hmm.
And you kind of, I feel like the reason I wanted to interview you is I feel like you have more passion and meaning behind what you're doing with your coaching and helping people's lives, helping people make their own lives better because of your experiences in your past that kind of set you apart from just the average Joe out there trying to make an extra buck, you know, on coaching. And I heard your story for the first time was it last month or the month before that you were a speaker at that event?
Technically this month on the 3rd and 4th, so it was like...
Oh, yeah, it was. Shoot.
Yeah, it feels like forever, to be honest.
I know, it really does. It's been a busy month. But, yeah, so I heard your story for the first time, and I was so impressed with how far you've come. And I just think it's beautiful to see people that start out with a lot of struggles and then take that and turn it into something as beautiful and powerful as you have with your business and just with the way that you treat people. And so with that being said, please, if you would, tell us a little bit about your childhood and your experience with poverty and abuse, and then kind of tell us the effects it had on your life.
Okay, I will. Can I ask you a question first, Lise?
Yes.
Because this is your first time hearing it.
Yes.
I'm curious. Two things. One, how did you feel listening to it? Like through the story, what were the emotions you felt? What were the different emotions you felt listening to it at different times? We'll start with that question. I want to hear, just so people can hear and get primed for it, because I want to hear your experience of it.
So first of all, I just want to say I'm not a huge crier, but I cried listening to your story. I have a really rough past, so I felt like your story really struck a chord with me. But it's very heavy. I mean, where you came from and the experiences you went through as a kid were very heavy. So I would say that was probably my first thought, was like, wow, like this is a lot of stuff that he had to experience as a young kid and a lot of responsibility. And I felt a little bit of that heaviness in my chest when I was listening to your story. And then as you talked about where you are now and how much you changed and learned from that experience, I felt so much light and hope and happiness, and being like, yeah, people can change and people can start in these really rough places and make so much out of it. And so it was kind of a big contrast of darkness and heaviness and light and hope. So, yeah, that was my experience.
Okay, so second question is, it's been 3 weeks since I spoke. What have you implemented, or what have you changed because of my story in your own life?
Ironically, I kind of took your message a different direction, and we've talked a little bit outside of the event that I saw you speak at, but I have some places in my life, not financially, but some other places in my life, actually religiously, where I am struggling right now. And I think that my issue was I was afraid to really get into the nitty-gritty, uncomfortable darkness of my experiences that I've had religiously. And because of that, I wasn't able to get anywhere. I wasn't able to progress. And so after listening to your story and how much you really, I mean, you really had to dig deep into some personal characteristics and recognize them before you could really do anything about it and then change. And so that's the biggest thing that it's affected me with, is I've decided to allow myself to look at something that's not fun to look at about myself and my life and some experiences that I had in order to have that change that I want to have. So
that's awesome. See, you might think that I was up there talking about finances, and some people, I mean, obviously that's the place I hold. That's my career, is finances. But you're not the only one. There was multiple people who came out with a very similar desire to either talk about something religious, or essentially what it boils down to is really how I structured my speech. And that is, people need to first identify their identity, and then have confidence to live that new identity that they really feel is deep down inside themselves, and then go create a life and I would say a legacy of meaning out of that newfound identity, or refound identity, because I think we all are born with it. So my story, as it pertains to my childhood, thank you so much, Elise, for sharing that.
yeah.
But my story, really, I'm the 7th of 11 kids, and when I say I grew up in poverty and grew up in an abusive household, look, everybody's done that, right? At least you've experienced things that no human should ever experience. And it's unfortunate that you had to go through those experiences. It's unfortunate I had to go through my experiences. But like, to kind of paint a brief picture of what my life was like, my parents, most of my childhood, they worked as Pizza Hut drivers, so very little income. I'm the 7th of 11, and by the time I was 6 years old, I had 3 more little siblings, right? So I'm like, they were coming fast. My mom had to slow down after me. It wasn't like, well, I could kind of break. No, like, I grew up with me being one of the older persons in the family, because by the time I was cognizant and like knew what was going on, I already had 3 little siblings. So just like kind of put yourself in that position where you aren't really raised by a parent. You aren't really raised by anybody specifically. Your brothers and sisters maybe are helping kind of get you in trouble, so you kind of know where the boundaries are. Okay, that was kind of my upbringing in that respect. But then the living conditions, I used to say poverty, right? And people were like, okay, well, what does that mean? There's a lot of people in poverty. Okay, my house, if you can imagine this, paint yourself a picture. You drive up to my house. It's a 2-story structure. The bottom story has old faded white vinyl siding on it that basically looks yellow now. The top part was just low-grade OSB that you could see through the rafters. There's massive windows are boarded up. When you walk into the bathroom, you can see underneath the foundation, there's just a dirt hole, and you can see under the foundation. I showed all these pictures when I was speaking, so trying to just paint you a picture here. And that's really how I was raised. I even, like, once we kind of got the house put together, I slept underneath the stairs with 3 or 4 of my siblings. And when I used to tell people that, they used to be like, oh, like Harry Potter. And we were super sheltered as kids. And so I would just always agree with them. I was like, yeah, I guess, like, did Harry Potter sleep under the stairs? Yeah, he had a room. And I was like, oh, okay, then I guess like Harry Potter. Felt like I was one of the cool kids because I had a room like Harry Potter. Until I was like 18, no, I was probably 20 actually, I finally watched the Harry Potter movies. I had this girlfriend who was like, you need to watch these. So we sat down and were watching them. And when I saw Harry Potter's room, I was horrified. I was horrified that I had been lying to people my whole life, right? They thought that I had this this almost like, what's the word when you remember something and it's a fond memory?
Oh, I know what you're talking about, but
nostalgic. Yeah, that's the word.
Like, right? Nostalgic? Okay.
So I thought it was like this nostalgic feeling that I got to have a room like Harry Potter, but it wasn't nostalgic. My room, there was open insulation on the walls. There was open wiring on the walls. You couldn't really, like, we had a little foam pad It was nothing like Harry Potter's room. He had a door, he had paint, he had a bed, he had a dresser. He had his own private space all to himself. And as terrible it was, and as terrible as his family was, it still sucked. I mean, like, for him, it still sucked, but mine was, like, way worse.
Yeah.
Me. And so I felt really bad that I'd been lying to people. But honestly, that wasn't the worst part of my childhood. The worst part for me that I experienced was how I experienced my mom treating me and the abuse of that. Now, I don't share this story to harm anybody in my family. We've all healed and we all have great relationships at this point. But due to the emotional and hormonal imbalances, my mom was not like sane, like legitimately. She was not sane for most of my childhood, and that led to a lot of abuse. And throughout my childhood, I didn't like getting abused, as most people don't. And so I thought I would just protect myself, and my way of protecting myself was to become the enforcer in my house. And as I grew up, thankfully, my older brother, when I was about 12 or 13 years old, my older brother Rex actually wrestled me down to the ground and helped me understand, held me to a point where I couldn't move. I literally could not move. And he explained to me that this is how people felt emotionally and mentally when I walked into a room. I'd become that oppressive in my presence. I'd become that oppressive. And during that kind of interaction, when I started to see what the impact I was having on my family, my mind was reminded of a time when I was 4 or 5 years old. I was, well, maybe 5 or 6. I don't know exactly how old I was. It's the problem with like being abused. You forget the timeline. But basically, this specific situation, I was driving the truck with my grandpa. We were on the way home from the dump, windows down, warm summer day, radio was on. He reached over, turned down the radio, and put his hand on my knee and said, "Hey, Sam, your voice is really pleasant to listen to. You could be a leader one day, maybe even be on the radio." And then he just turned the radio back up. And for me, still to this day, that is the first time that I remember actually being cared about, that somebody actually loved me enough to like give me some positive feedback, to share a strength with me, anything like that. So that's when I gained my identity as a leader. But what I found was that as I progressed and got older, I've now confronted with this identity that essentially I had been using this gift of leadership to harm, destroy, denigrate, and hurt my family members. And that contrast, that was one of the most painful things I've experienced, because I thought I was showing up one way and I wasn't. And that story leads to a lot of people who have been through identity crises, who have lost their identity. They thought they were one thing, they thought they were showing up one way, and then all of a sudden they're confronted with the fact that the way they thought they were showing up, who they thought they were, is no longer. They've lost their identity, and then they're just lost. And that struggle happens often in relationships. It happens often in marriages. It happens often in parent-child relationships, in brother-sister relationships, in work relationships. It happens all the time where we think we have an identity, we're living up to that identity, and then soon we find out that either what other people need our identity to be is different than what we think it is, or we just find out that like we thought we were doing one thing and actually we were showing up completely different. But either way, that lack of identity leads to massive amounts of uncertainty, anxiety, depression, malnutrition, and we just lose the ability to care for ourselves. And that's kind of where I was going into my college career and really moving forward to study neuropsychology and find out why that is. So hopefully that's a good representation of my childhood. If you want to know more, come to a speaking event. I've got a few coming up. So, yeah.
And I'll put a link to your speaking engagement, if that's okay with you. Yep. Put a link to your speaking engagement and then also your website, if that's all right. And that way people can find you. So thank you. That's a humongous story. And like you said, a lot of people have gone through things that people shouldn't have to go through, but it's something that I feel like helps people connect with each other. But when you're in the thick of it, it's difficult to connect when you're going through something traumatic and something that you, as a kid, you don't really even know how to cope with stuff like that. And sometimes parts of it seem normal because it's all you've ever known, but then there's other parts of it that make it difficult to connect with people outside of that situation. So how did you feel that during that young age, while you were living in those kinds of conditions, before before things were able to be healed, did you struggle with connecting with people outside of your family as well, or did did that thing that you felt constricting other people when you were around or when you were in the room, did that carry out to other connections outside of the home as well? Or did you have friends in school or anything like that? What was that like?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I was actually homeschooled. Most of our family was homeschooled. So we didn't really have friends, tons of friends outside of, which led to further challenges of connection, for sure. But I think it brings up a good point. So I'm grateful that you're asking this. The idea of connection is so interesting. When you're raised in a situation with a mom who's kind of like a parent or anybody, it could be a sibling, it could be an uncle, aunt, anybody. When you're raised in a situation of such unpredictability, and specifically when it's another person in your life that's unpredictable, then you learn to be a master manipulator. You learn to become a shell for survival. Like it's like PTSD where there is no connection. All there is survival. And so although as I grew up, I appeared on the outside as somebody good at connecting with people, somebody good at making friends, somebody who could be the life of a party, right? On the outside, and people still today, they're like, oh, Sam, you're really fun to be around. You're really good at talking to people. You're all these things. It's like, that's something that was a survival skill. Now, I'm grateful for it, and I wouldn't trade it for anything. But I learned all those skills as a survival skill, turning inward and really learning to connect with yourself. I believe that is the ultimate challenge that so many people put off, because it's actually easier to connect with somebody else and get your fulfillment and your satisfaction from somebody else in a connection with somebody outside of yourself than learning to connect with yourself. And that's why I'm so passionate about you finding your own identity. Connect with yourself and find out, like, if we're walking down the street and somebody needs help, what's your natural inclination to do? What's your first inclination, your first reaction of, like, how can I help this person? How can I serve? Right? When somebody is offering, you're at the grocery store, you're in the checkout line, and somebody's like, hey, would you like to donate to this charity? What's your initial thing? Like, yes, I want to. And then you think, I don't have the money for that. Like, I'm barely able to buy these groceries right now. I'm barely able to pay for gas, right? You don't have money to give people. And so for me, I think that's just a shame that people are letting money dictate their identity. And so once people identify their identity and can remove the need of money, we can emotionally handle that and separate that into a different compartment. And then we can actually identify, well, what do you want to do? Once we identify that, then we can bring the financial component back in and say, okay, what can we do financially to give you the financial confidence to start living your passion? Even if it's just 1 hour a week, you're going to go serve. Even if it's 1 day a week or whatever it is, how can we help you start living in your purpose and gradually make your purpose your life and your legacy? And so that's what I'm most passionate about. But I think connection, until you are willing to connect with yourself, there is no connection outwards. And specifically with relationships, I'm so glad I figured this out before I got married.
Yeah.
But, and I believe you're some sort of a relationship coach, right? At least I feel like you're so much more. I don't
delve into it very deep, but a little bit, yeah, of course.
I feel like you're so much more than that. But I feel like some of the people that are probably listening to this would maybe look to you for relationship advice. Okay, but when you're trying to be in a relationship with anybody, anything, even yourself, you cannot connect more than you know about yourself. I use an example of like a shoebox. If you're walking around with a shoebox, but it's taped shut and you've never looked inside, this is all of your past experiences. But if you're too scared to look inside your shoebox, but you're walking around trying to offer somebody this shoebox and say, hey, don't you like this shoebox? Let's get together and then we'll unpack this together. Or even worse, let's get together and we'll just throw this sucker away and we'll never look in it. It's such a sadness to me, because with all of the bad things that happened in my childhood, and there was a lot of bad things, just like there is in anybody's childhood, right?
Mm-hmm.
I'm so incredibly grateful for every one of those experiences, because I was willing to go and unpack them and really pull back all of the pain, pull back all of the emotional connection and stories that I told myself about the experiences, and just change the meaning of those experiences into one of positivity and power.
Yeah.
All of those stories are now some of my greatest strengths, rather than things that happen to me and weaknesses. They're now my greatest strengths, and I want that so badly for everybody else that I meet.
Yeah, I love that. And I love that analogy of the shoebox. It's so true that I think a lot of people who grow up looking for validation from their parents, it's kind of where you would look. Typically, that's like the natural place that you would look for validation and for love and acceptance and all of that.
Mm-hmm.
And you don't get it from them, so you start to learn to look for it elsewhere. And I think that there's not enough, like, people aren't teaching it to young people enough to look inward for that validation and acceptance and connect with yourself. So I absolutely love that. I love that analogy. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem.
Great. Well, I was going to ask kind of how those experiences are benefiting your life now. And if I understand right, it really seems like what your biggest benefit is that you're getting that fulfillment in living your legacy and your purpose by helping other people. And that seems like what drives you is to help other people almost free themselves and connect with themselves in the same way that you've been able to. Would you tell us just a little bit more about your coaching and your speaking and kind of where people can find you?
Yeah, absolutely. So can I backtrack just a little bit about my coaching and speaking? Because I think this is important. It kind of leads into it. But can I call you – I'm not going to call you out necessarily, Lise, but I'm going to use an example of a conversation that we had. Fair enough?
Yes, that's fine. Yeah.
So Lisa and I have had conversations outside of this, specifically about helping people find their identity, helping people really become in tune and connected with themselves. And she's asked me at one point or another why I don't start a conference or even charge people for like this type of service and start being paid for this type of coaching. And for me, it's a crusade. I'm religious about serving and loving people. At one point, I did try and charge somebody for it, but I couldn't even accept the money because it felt wrong inside of me to be charging for something that I believe is just it's an essential part of humanity. It's an essential part of being that I just want to give that gift freely. So I don't make money or charge to have those conversations. I'm totally willing to have those conversations with anybody who'd like to sit down and chat and really dig deep into their soul. And I'm willing to be as vulnerable and open as you'd like me to be. Some people don't like that, and that's their prerogative, but I'm not going to hold anything back from my life because I believe that when I'm being vulnerable, I'm in power. Okay. And so that's a key philosophy of me when it comes to coaching and speaking. So I do public speaking. I love speaking. I love getting on stage in front of as many people as will get into a room and listen to me. I'm always nervous to get on stage, but I don't think I've ever like backed down from the opportunity. It scares the crap out of me, but I love it.
You can't tell.
Yeah, I think it's because I'm so passionate about what I'm sharing, but two, because I'm so passionate about what I'm sharing, I just so deeply want it to be accepted. And the thought of it not being accepted or me not being a good vessel or conduit for what I have to share, that makes me sad sometimes. So I do my best to do that. But I have an event coming up here on May 11th. It's called the Next Generation Legacy and Wealth Workshop. And we're going to do a deep dive into the money habits, the financial mindsets, the things that are essential on how to get your legacy, get your identity, get your purpose out into the world and to make money doing so. and to have the financial confidence to live your purpose regardless of what you believe about money. Okay, so we're going to help you do that, and that's what we're going to talk about there. It's a fantastic thing. A lot of people who are going to be attending, they already are successful financially, right? In their minds, they're doing okay financially, but they aren't feeling fulfilled. And it's so common that people get to a point where they're comfortable financially, but they aren't fulfilled. And so my objective is to help you have both. One, have a good understanding of money to where you're not emotionally tied to it, but also how to gain greater fulfillment, peace, and confidence in your life through a legacy. And so that's what I do speaking wise. From a professional side, I do help people once they identify their identity. I make my money generally from helping people with their finances. And I love doing that. I can't go into too much detail here on the air, but if you'd like to know more, just message me, and we can set up a phone call, and I'd love to go into more detail there. You can find out quite a bit more on my website, samknickerbocker.com. And then also I run a podcast. So I do a podcast 3 days a week, and it's called Fuel Your Legacy. You mentioned that. Everything I do is really to help you and anybody I come in contact with get the right fuel, the right jet fuel, rocket fuel, gasoline, whatever it is, get the right thing to fuel their legacy. What's going to really help them launch into their true self and their highest power.
I love that. That's awesome. Thank you so much for taking time to share your story and being vulnerable enough to share your story. I think there's a lot of people that resonate a lot with that, and I'm glad that there's people like you that can share stories like that. And I really love what you're doing because of what you've been through and in order to help other people who may have gone through similar things. So I will add links to the bio of these videos, and then hopefully people will reach out to you as well. You're amazing. Thank you so much for everything you do.
Thank you, Lise. You're awesome too. And I'm excited to hang out with you more, you and your husband.
Yes. Thank you. All right. Well, you have a great night. Thank you so much.
Okay. No problem. We'll talk to you later. Bye.
Thanks. Bye.